Sports for Real with Coach Hall. Had a great week one of college football. A lot of good action taking place, especially some eyes being open as the Buffaloes went down to TCU and knocked them off. A lot of people weren't expecting that, but you had to have some kind of talent or you wouldn't have been doing all that talking. But there's some holes there to be fixed and some improvements to be made, and we'll see how that takes place as things move forward. But the biggest thing I want to talk about as a whole is the Pac-10. The Pac-10, for the first time since 1932, had all of its teams, no matter whatever the configuration was, meaning the number of teams. It's the first time since 1932 that all of the teams won their first game. USC is off to a 2-0 start. Now, the competition hasn't been the strongest, but it doesn't matter. Each year they all start off about the same. So for the Pac-10 to go 13-0 in the first full week, that's pretty impressive. And it's impressive for a lot of reasons because it's kind of like ironic. In the last couple of weeks, the Pac-12 was pretty much exploded. Teams moving everywhere, and you got 10 teams that moved on overall, and there's only 2 remaining. And those 2 remaining, Oregon State and Washington State, don't seem like nobody wants to be involved with them. But as I've done a little research and found out some more information, that might not be a bad thing. Why? Well, to be a legitimate conference, you have to have at least 8 teams. But if your teams decide they want to all go at the same time, like what happened with the Pac-12, you can still have a 2-year provisional period to rebuild a conference or try to save it however you want to do it. So if Oregon State and Washington State choose to do so, they can remain a 2-team conference. And remember, they are expanding the college football playoffs next season to 12 teams. Well, if that's the case, if you got a 2-team conference, one of those teams will be guaranteed to get into the playoffs. And guess what? They don't have to split the money with anybody except themselves. So if the Pac-12 is guaranteed a $50 million payout, they just got $25 million apiece. And that's a good thing because I'm thinking all along that the Pac-12 is going to rise again. So if they could have found some way to keep the conference together, I think everybody's going to start coming back. Take Stanford and California. They're going to be going all the way over to the East Coast to play in the ACC. Well, that's fine for football because you only have so many trips you're going to have to take cross country. But when you are the basketball team, it's going to be a lot more. Then you got your softball and your baseball and your swimming and your golf. All these lower tier teams, they're going to spend an awful lot of time on the East Coast. Now, what a lot of people aren't aware of is that people are questioning the academic standard level of Stanford now. So if you have your athletes who are already considered to be not quite as high as a student, say in the chemistry department, this is going to hurt when you have to be traveling across the country 2 or 3 times, probably every 2 or 3 weeks. You're going to be going cross country at least 3 times. So it's a lot to take into an account. And I think what's going to happen is Stanford and Cal is going to get tired of that. And they're going to look over there and see what Oregon State and Washington State are gaining as a 2-team conference, and they're eventually going to come back home. So that'll be 4 teams, and then you're going to eventually gain 4 more from somewhere else. So they might get Fresno State. Maybe San Diego State might finally come over, even though I won't want them after they turn me down. But there are opportunities there for the Pac-12 to survive. And I think it all comes down to money. And when those other teams figure out that all this moving around stuff is not what it's cracked up to be, the Pac-12 will rise again. So that's something to keep your eyes on. But the question is, will Oregon State and Washington State decide to stick together to keep the Pac-12 going? Something to keep your eyes on. Meanwhile, we got a lot of good games coming up in week number 2, and as the week goes on, we'll be previewing that. So keep your eyes peeled. Sports for Real.